interesting hams. Why?
We still have some people who are calling in, but I think it's about time we're going to get things off the ground here again. Again, as we go along, we invite everybody who's joined us tonight to ask questions and type questions into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen and send those to the all panelists prompt there. The session will be recorded, so look for an email in the next few days with a link to this recording if you know anybody who wants to hear it at a later time. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat box window on the right side of your screen and send your message to Paul Ellerton, who's helping us out on the technical side of things tonight. And again, fire away with the questions as we go along. So let's get things off the ground a little bit here from Old Cars Weekly and Old Cars Report headquarters in Iola, Wisconsin. Welcome to tonight's online seminar entitled How to Condition Grade Your Vehicle. My name is Brian Ernest, and I'm the editorial director for the automotive group with Old Cars Weekly and F&W Media. And today I'm going to be joined by a panel of three car guys who really know what they're talking about when it comes to tonight's subject matter. First up on our panel is Angelo Van Bogart, the editor of Old Cars Weekly. And next to him is Ron Kowalski, an expert on vehicle grading and vehicle auctions, and also the technical editor for Old Cars Weekly, and the editor for both the Old Cars Price Guide magazine and the Collector Car Price Guide annual price guide book. And we're also glad tonight to have John Hafferbecker with us. He is not only an old car hobbyist himself, but also an appraiser with Point Appraisal Services in central Wisconsin. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'll definitely try not to do all of the talking. We're going to stick loosely to a script, I guess, tonight, but we invite anybody to type questions as we go. We'll try to get to them. If we don't get to your questions during the program, we're going to save those all, and we'll try to get to some at the end. And again, we'll send out emails privately afterwards if we don't answer your question during the seminar tonight. See, Ron, I know if you're going to be planning on sending the emails out by the end of the week, should we tell people that they're going to get their replies by the end of the week, in the next couple of days? Should we give everybody an expectation on when they might get an individual email on a question?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. A couple of days.
Okay. Boys, I guess before we start going through the slides here, I just want to throw it out for openers. Why do we need appraisals? Why do we need a condition grading system? Let's cut straight to the chase here and give us the short answer.
Exactly. First of all, you don't want to ask too much and you don't want to ask too little. You want to find that right spot that's going to get your car sold, have your car properly valued, so in the event that you may need to file an insurance claim or you want to sell it, like I said, your car doesn't languish at the end of your yard with a for sale sign on it for 6 months, but also the first person that comes along to buy your car doesn't give you half of what it's worth. So an appraisal is going to give you an accurate, fair market value range for your car and give you a very good starting point of what to ask for. So the phone rings when you list it, but you're also not giving away the farm. Second of all, insurance. We all want to have our assets, our belongings properly insured, so in the event of a loss, we're able to replace that item either with another item or with its equal monetary value. So an appraisal is going to give you those two things at the very least and let you work from there. It's a big investment to own a car, and you should know exactly what it's worth.
Uses of condition rating, and here we want to touch on judging. And the bullet point we have here reads that value does not determine judging, but vice versa. And Ange, I know you wanted to speak to this also when it comes to how judging does or does not affect the appraisal value of a car.
Sure. One of the things that we hear sometimes is that somebody says, well, my car consistently gets first place at our local car shows, so it must be a number one. That's not necessarily true. A number one car, or a very high or number two, certainly could win first place awards at local car shows. But what we're talking about is a car that's shown in a judged system or even a concourse type situation. Cars that are true number ones are going to be ranked and be getting close to 100 points in a 100-point system. We're going to be getting close to 1,000, if not 1,000 points in a 1,000-point system. So there's a lot that goes on when it comes to shows and when it comes to values and judging. So that's not the sole reason. At a local car show, if your car is pitted against two other number threes and your car's a number three, but it happens to be the best of the number threes, well, sure, you're going to win first place. So that doesn't necessarily make it a number one. It might just be a very strong number three.
John, you want to speak to this? Do cars that have gotten any big awards, or the owner comes to you saying that this car has been judged, at a particular show. Does that sway your opinion when you're looking and examining a car and trying to grade it?
Well, it has an impact, but generally each car stands on its own, and a good appraisal job will involve looking at a lot of the details of the car, the workmanship, the quality of the workmanship, the paint. There's terms like no rust. That's one that's very widely used and not necessarily real well understood. No rust or no rust ever is really what you want to hear. That has a big impact on it. But in regards to your question about the judging, I don't put a lot of I don't know if the term would be faith, but a lot of stock maybe in the fact that the car is number one, like Angelo said. It may be the best one there, but that doesn't make it a number one car. So that's how I feel about it.
Does the car owners work you over on that point at all?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes they feel, obviously most car owners are very proud of their car, especially if they've been very involved in like, for example, ground up restoration. They're very proud of it, and to have gotten a whole bunch of first place awards, you get to thinking pretty highly of your car, and then it's my job as an appraiser to come in and get realistic, and I read the numbering system in the front of Old Car's Price Guide, and most appraisers agree with the numbering system. We think it's very fair and realistic. I'll read that out to the car owner, and it pretty much it's realistic, and most people agree with it.
We're going to talk a little bit about that 1 through 6 condition grading system that John just touched on here. Ron, I guess you probably is one of the best people to speak to this, where this started, 1 versus 5, 1 versus 6. Give us a little bit of the nickel version of the history of how this system evolved.
Okay, the condition rating system originated in 1978, which is when Old Car's Price Guide was first published. It was mainly developed by two gentlemen, names that are probably pretty familiar in the hobby, Kenny Batalf and Jim Lenski, and both of those gentlemen have since retired, and that system has been tweaked through the years to kind of what it is today. Originally it was a 1 through 5 rating scale, and in place of the number 6 condition rating, we had what was the factory price of the vehicle. It was 1 through 5, and then the factory price. And at the beginning of 1990, based on reader and user feedback of the price guide, we determined that we needed a number 6 grade to determine the price of what we call a parts car. There was a lot of interaction or action, if you will, where people were buying these kind of used up cars to cannibalize for parts, and so we developed the number 6 condition rating, and that took the place of the factory price category. The 1 through 6 condition rating scale, as John alluded to earlier, and each category's definition is now pretty much accepted as a standard of the industry.
Let's start here. We're going to talk, speaking of the 1 through 6, we're going to go through starting at the bottom right here. We'll just run through each of these real quick, and we're going to start at number 6 with the bottom of the scale, which is the parts car. Now that seems pretty self-explanatory here, but you really need to have these cars rated, or a rating for such cars in the bottom of these, don't you? And you want to start with
Sure.
Here at the bottom of the scale?
Yep. This example I chose for the number 6 is obviously a very tough car. This is a Model A400 found at the Iowa Old Car Show this summer. This is a car that there are very few parts on it, but it's also a very rare car, so anything you can use on this is going to help a restoration. Somebody actually may buy this car and restore it just because of its rarity, and bless them for it. But here's a car that it has a few parts on it. It's got some wood parts, some of the rear window framing. It's really only good for parts. It's way too far gone to take as a serious restoration. You're going to be fabricating parts and hunting for cars that are even worse than this to try to get parts for a rare car like this. But basically a car that's only good for parts. It's too rusty, too incomplete. to be considered a feasible restoration project.
And then next up here is number 5, which we're going to kind of label restorable. Needs complete restoration of body, chassis, and interior. And you want to speak to that car there? Would you be caught dead in that car you've put on the slide here?
Well, I guess I'd be caught live in it because it's my car, but I have no problem talking about its shape. Well, this car looks like it's pretty solid. It has some rust issues, and what you see in the picture is just the tip of the iceberg. It has rust issues underneath and inner fenders. Every part of this car needs to be restored, even though it may or may not be functioning, in order to be show quality a number 1, or, in all honesty, even a number 3. It needs glass, it needs rechroming, it needs metal work, it obviously needs paint. The mechanical components that do work on it are certainly not to a visual level of a restored car. They may have rust on them, or pitting, or scale, or grease, or oil built up on them. It's a car that needs absolutely everything, but it's all there. Being a complete car, it's relatively straight, and it's not too rusty, so that it's absolutely only a parts car.
We move up to good here, and this is where we get into the drivers, the cars that are generally running, the cars that guys can take to the shows if they want. Biggest difference between the 4 and the 5, missing parts, missing stuff off of these?
This is a car that's completely usable, something you can drive, and drive safely. It's all there. Some of the parts might be in good shape, but by and large, most of them need to be restored. All of them would need to be restored to be considered excellent. This is an exceptional car. I'll speak specifically to this one. This happens to be a very rare unrestored Porsche. This is a car, because of its age, rarity, it's being a pre-war car, being a high-end pre-war car, that it's actually worth a lot, and probably as much as a number 2 or a number 1, because it is original and unrestored. But if you were to want to take this car, bring it up to being a Pebble Beach winner or a number 1 Thousand Point car, you would have to go through everything.
Moving on up the scale here, we get to rating 3, very good. And that might even be, understating it a little bit when you get to 3. These are definitely excellent cars. This is not a C on the A, B, C, D, E scale. These are really nice cars. These are the cars that you see most commonly at the big shows. And the old 20-footer rule applies on these cars.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the kind of car that most of us see at every car show we go to. This is what occupies at least 90% of the field usually, depending on the show, of course. But this is a car that works well. It may or may not win its class in judging or in a People's Choice Award. It's a great car. It may have had rechroming. It may have had new paint, or, as in the case of the car that we have illustrated, which is the 1930 Peerless 16, it's an exceptional original car. Original cars, even if they're stunning, gorgeous, just like this car, can never be more than a number 3 car, just like this one. So I picked this because this car is absolutely exceptional. If you were to walk up to this, somebody who doesn't know cars would walk up to this and just assume it's restored, and it's a number 1. Well, here's a case where this car is exceptional. It's original chrome, it's original paint. Even though it's beautiful, it's still a number 3. It's never had a nut and bolt restoration.
John, you said you've done a couple thousand restorations. You were talking before we started the show here. Is the number 3 the vast majority of the cars that you wind up looking at?
Yes, most of the cars that I do are number 3s, and unfortunately a lot of the owners feel that they're number 2s or 1s. So it's a reality check with the owner when we're going through the appraisal process.
We get a little bit further up the scale here where the rating is number 2, and we're going to kind of define that as fine, well restored, or a combination of superior restoration or excellent original. And you kind of illustrate this with a pretty exceptional car here. Just goes to show that even exceptional cars maybe don't qualify as a 1. This is a 2 here. Can you speak to the car that we're talking about here?
Sure. I picked this car just because it's so well known that its history is pretty clear. This is a car that was restored some years ago. Its owner does exceptional work to keep up its level of restoration. The car is absolutely beautiful. So does the number 1. And I wanted to show this because this car has several years on its number one restoration. So it's hard to find a car that's a number two, because most people that have number ones, they look like number ones. It's only when you know and when you get up close and you examine the chrome and the paint and get underneath there that you realize that, okay, this car was a number one, but it has a few years on the paint. It has a few years on the chrome. The upholstery's been sat in several times, so it may not be as firm. So it's very difficult. It's very hard to find a number two because it really takes close examination. So I just really selected this car because this Duesenberg happens to be a car that it's well known. It was restored several years ago now. So
John, number two, how often do they come up? Do you get many of them, or?
Well, yeah. Like I said, often the owners feel that they are, better than they sometimes realistically are. I don't know how many of the other appraisers out there do this, but I often will split the condition. I might say a car appears to be a number 2 to 2.5, or a 2.5 to a 3. I don't have a problem with splitting that. And then, of course, you've got to look at the price guides and use a good dose of common sense and come up with something that's realistic that everybody can live with later. So, the majority of the appraisal that I do are number 3s, but I do also do a lot of number 2s. They're a fine car, but a quick look underneath and look at the detailing and stuff, that'll usually separate the one from the 2 very, very easily.
And of course, at the top of the scale, we have rating number 1 out of 6, and we're kind of defining that as excellent, restored to the maximum professional standards of quality in every area. Angie kind of touched on this a little bit. Pretty much every nut and bolt, every corner, and every square inch of the car is as good as it can be made, and probably somebody started with the ground up, and just money is no object, regardless of what kind of car you're talking about here.
yeah, absolutely. I picked this car, which happens to belong to famous collector Nicola Bulgari. It's a 37 Packard 12. The car was used as a starter's car at a racetrack in Italy, so it had some bumps and bruises, and I would say the before picture showed that this was a number 4 to number 5 car when it started, not having seen it in person before the restoration. But this is a car shown at Pebble Beach. Everything, absolutely everything, has been restored on this car. This is a car you could flip upside down and eat a steak off its tie rod ends. That is the point I use when I'm determining a number 1, and I crawl underneath the car. Can I eat off of its tie rod ends? Can I eat off the bottom of its engine? If I can say that to every component I see on the car, and all those components are absolutely brand new or better looking, then I know I'm looking at a number 1.
John, how often you run into them?
Of the approximately 2,000 appraisals I've done over the last 20 or so years, I've done 1 or 2 number 1s and a couple of 1.5s to 2s. And one in particular I recall looking at, the guy didn't want to put the wheel covers back on the car because it was going to scratch the wheels, the new paint on the wheels. So a car like that to me is, it's actually better than new. The underside looks as good as the top side, and we're pretty sure it didn't come out of the factory that way. So I would classify that as a number 1 / restored to better than new. They just didn't, most of the manufacturers never finished the bottom side as well as they did the top side. So that was over-restored in my mind. So definitely a number 1.
We got one question here, guys. Let's throw out here. We're getting a few questions coming in. We'll try to start picking a few up here. This might be a good question at this point in the seminar. We got a question from James Rashi. James, I hope I'm not butchering your name here. How does extraordinary documentation affect value? John, maybe we should serve that one up to you. A car that's really well documented, has a lot of paperwork to go with it. Does it sway your valuation in that car at all?
A little, but basically each car stands on its own, and I usually ask for any documentation that they might have. And one big thing, item on a lot of cars is, does it have an original engine? Do the numbers match? Well, some manufacturers had matching number systems and some didn't. So actually, the more documentation you have, the better off you will be if something disastrous happens to the car, or if you're at a dispute with your insurance company, or for some other reason you need to verify, what the car is worth or what it was all about. So I usually recommend to the owner to put together some plenty of detail before, during, and after pictures if they can, if it's available. during a restoration, before, during, and after, and any previous owner's names or any information you can get on the vehicle, and put together a nice little booklet or a file or something with a lot of documentation. The more documentation you have, I think the better off you'll be from an insurance point of view if something happens to it. But as far as the value of the vehicle, documentation definitely helps. How much, it will be very difficult to pick out and say, well, you know, if you have it really extremely well documented, is it worth 10% more? I'm not really sure.
I can speak from personal experience. I'm a sucker for paperwork, and the more I know about a car's history, the more I'm willing to pay a little bit more for it, and I've done that. I've paid a little bit more. I've maybe paid 5-10% more because I knew that car had documentation. I knew its own history. I had the window sticker. I had every oil change documented, every piece of work on that. So to me, I actually seek out cars like that, and I'm willing to pay a little bit of a premium.
We have one more question here, guys. It might be another good time to throw this one out. Similar to real estate, does there exist an area index for pricing in different parts of the country? I think what the question here is, valuation is going to vary from region to region, parts of the country. Is there some sort of sliding scale where values go up or down like real estate in different parts of the world?
Well, there's a big factor in the appraisal business, and it's basically all about rust. The term no rust is very loose, and no rust ever, of course, is a big deal. And often when I do an appraisal on a car from the Midwest here, or a car that's currently in the Midwest and may have come from somewhere else, I usually ask the owner, did this car come from a warmer climate or somewhere else? If so, we should note that in the appraisal, because a Midwest car more than likely is going to have a fair amount of rust on it. And sometimes it may have had a complete rebuild with many new panels because it was a Midwest car. So a car from the South or Southwest or a really dry region, in my mind, is definitely worth more money.
And I think the readers are also asking, too, is there a price guide? If somebody says, is there one just for California? Is there one for New York State or Florida? And the answer to that is no. But, Ron, I think you can kind of speak to this, that I know we take a national average because that's the best you can do because cars will get a little bit more in California than they will in the upper Midwest or than they will in Mississippi.
Yes. We see certainly there's different cars that have followings in different parts of the country. When I sit down to do Old Cars Price Guide, I have to factor in that there is a difference in values, you know, looking at cars on the coast versus cars from the Midwest. How condition rating plays into that. Just as John alluded to, you know, cars from the drier, warmer climates are going to be less rusty. And the thing that I get back to, and I know we touched on it a bit in previous answers here, when we see rust, that's what we preach here. That rust is just the tip of the iceberg. And so, looking at restoration and things like that, when you have rust, you have a very expensive problem. But yes, I have to factor in a lot of different things, and one of those is the regional aspects of, you know, what cars are bringing on the coast versus what they're bringing in the Midwest.
And this is something that you'll probably never see as specific pricing for cars in certain areas of the country. But I do want to point out that if you are very concerned about that, there is a resource for that. If you go to Old Cars Report, you can actually look up and determine where those cars were sold at. The auction venue is actually listed there, along with the date and the description of the car, and you can actually see for yourself. If you're looking at 57 Chevy Bel Air convertibles, and you just want to see what they're selling for in California, you can go right through those listings and just look at auctions in California. So there's a benefit to that. That's probably the only place I can think of that you would actually be able to find regional pricing and see sold prices for cars in certain areas of the country.
California, it segues us right into another good question that I just can't let go of here, you guys. I know you guys are going to want to talk to this one a little bit. It's a question about celebrities. From Steve Kramick. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Steve, thanks for this one because this is good. This is the fact that a celebrity owned a vehicle in the past helps the value. And it comes up in auctions. You see people go gaga over a car that Elvis supposedly owned, or Don Johnson once owned, or, you know, Reggie Jackson has had, of course, a lot of them. Ron, I know that I've heard you go on rants about this before. Celebrity-owned cars, can you make any generalizations about that?
Yes, I think without question that, anything that Elvis owned or any celebrity, we use Elvis a lot. But that is a fact that we're a country that is enamored with celebrities. We worship movie stars. The whole film industry, everything about it. That any car that was owned or a truck or whatever owned by a celebrity is going to bring more. The other thing that I noticed, and this ties into our question about celebrity status, is cars that are in collections also tend to bring more money. And the gentleman that owns a collection doesn't necessarily have to be a celebrity. He may be a celebrity within the hobby, but it's just for whatever reason, maybe because the history is a little better known about the car that's in a collection, or just, people, they tend to be a better class of car. I would class that in that same celebrity ownership or celebrity value, where these cars in collections tend to also bring more money.
I would like to point out too that if you're looking at buying a celebrity car, or you're looking at selling a celebrity car, my first thing that I would point out is prove it. I want to have rock solid documentation that car was owned by that person. I want photographs, I want documents or copies of titles with serial numbers. I want the serial number on that car to be clean, obviously not tampered with. We joke up around the office all the time that if we see a Cadillac that was expensive, we just say, oh, well, they must have said Elvis owned it. And seriously, it does affect value, but you better be prepared to prove it. It better be a car that's extremely well documented. If I see a car that is said to be celebrity owned, but the documentation is very weak, or even in an ad, I know space is often lacking, but I want rock solid proof, otherwise I'm just going to laugh and move on.
All right, let's move forward here in our list of slides here. And our next topic here, what is done in the field to determine condition? And Angela, you want to start with this one, and John, feel free to jump in wherever you feel. But crawling under cars to view chassis and suspensions, determining the level of type of restoration. And go ahead and take it from there. I know a lot goes on.
Sure. In the several times I've covered auctions for Ron, the first thing I do when I walk up to a car is I get on my hands and knees and I look at the underneath of the car. And if I can eat my steak off the tie rod ends, like I said before, or off any other part of the car, I know that there's potential. I'm looking at a number one. If I crawl underneath that car and I see that it's got road grime, there are stone chips, that there's rust, I know I'm not looking at a number one, and I can start right at number three and figure out from number three what that car is. However, if the underneath of the car does look absolutely fantastic, as good or better than new, then I start looking at the chrome. I start looking at the trim. One of the little spots that's my little secret place to look when I'm looking at the condition of a car, especially on a 50s or 60s car, is I look at the wind vent frames, the little windows that are at the front forward part of the door, and I look to see if there's pitting. If the owner has gone through the work of having those re-chromed, they're often expensive to do, they're hard to do, if the glass fit, the weather stripping to fit. If they've gone through that level, then I keep looking to see if it is indeed a number one. I look at the hoses, I make sure the clamps are right. I make sure the upholstery is tight and the stitching is good. The condition of everything, all the little details. The first things I look at actually are the details, the little things. If those details look good, the car looks good, every other part, the paint looks brand new, inside the trunk, inside the back of the black bumper, the exhaust, then I know what I'm looking at. But the key for me is to start underneath. It really, I'm in a rush to condition rate 150 cars. It's just easier for 150 cars to get on my hands and knees and look underneath.
And as far as hearing them run, Ange, if you hear some knocking, if you hear some lifter noise, if you see some blue smoke coming out, is it critical when you're going to do an evaluation to get a car, to hear a car running, to see it moving, and what do you do? Do you take a leap of faith if you can't hear the car running in that case?
Well, in my opinion, you absolutely want to hear the car run, and you want to see it drive if you can't ride along in it. At an auction, this becomes difficult, but if you're really serious about a car looks like a number one, you want to figure out what you should pay for that car. figure out when it's going to cross the block, and stand by it, wait till it's ready to cross. You get to hear it fired up, you get to hear it run, you get to watch it run, you get to listen, see if there's any weird noises going on from the drive shaft to the rear end, or maybe even the transmission if there's a whine. But definitely be there to hear the car run, see it run, watch the tailpipe, listen for engine noise, because the car should work as well as it looks.
John, you want to address this one? Don't wear white pants if you're going to be checking out a car here. You get grass stains.
Well, I agree completely with Angelo. It's very important to get under the car and open the hood and look at the bottoms of the doors and bottom of the trunk and all the rust-prone areas, body supports, rubber gaskets. There's usually a donut between the body supports and the frame supports. And it's basically details make the difference. And it's very important to look it over very close.
And as far as getting the car running, can you do a good job of appraisal without it?
Well, without doing a compression test and, spending a whole bunch of time in the appraisal business, we really don't want to get into them that far. A lot of times we just have to take the owner's word for it and base the appraisal on a good running, nothing wrong with it, engine and drivetrain. I don't want to look through the guy's shoebox full of receipts. And I tell my customers that, a box full of receipts or a big bag or a packet full of receipts is not really what I call good documentation. You need to group this thing. You need to categorize the receipts and total them up and do it up on a computer if you can, if you have that available to you. And then have your receipts total for that section and then put another batch of receipts together for, like, say, the chassis and another one for the body and so forth. And then, of course, like I said earlier, before, during, and after pictures for restoration are very important. But yeah, getting underneath it and getting into the details is very important.
Our next screen here, and our next topic, errors in condition rating and common misunderstandings of condition rating. We've kind of already sort of touched on this one a little bit here, but I guess the most obvious one, people mistaking a 3 for a 1 or thinking any nice car is a number 1. Guys, I guess we start right there. And again, there's very few number 1s out there, and not very many people have them. That's kind of misconception number 1, isn't it?
Yep, and I think a lot of people who are probably listening in are part of that group that understands that most people think their cars are number 1s when indeed they're number 3s. But it's a reality that needs to be addressed and thoroughly, because there is a very strong misunderstanding. And I think a lot of people think that just because they painted a car, had it re-chromed and upholstered and rebuilt the engine, that they have a number 1 or number 2, and that's simply not the case. Like we said before, over and over again, it needs to be a full nut and bolt restoration, and those components that were restored need to be accurately restored, or as close as accurate as possible, as has been documented and that we know about. So that's really the key here, is getting to understand condition and what makes number 1, what makes number 3, and move from there.
And we had a question here on this topic from Heather Lejeune, and it's exactly what you're just talking about. If a vehicle has not been gone through down to nuts and bolts, it cannot be considered better than a number 3, correct? Is that an accurate statement?
That is correct. That is correct. The 1 through 6 system is based on the very fact that a number 1 and number 2s have had nut and bolt restorations.
So aside from maybe rolling a car out of the showroom when it was new, parking it for the rest of its life, it's never going to be a number 1 in that extreme case.
I wouldn't, and I would even say that that's a number 1. Even if a car has 1 mile on it, as long as it's been hermetically sealed in a bag and it remains as pristine as the minute it rolled off the showroom, with absolutely no decomposition, no orange setting in on any bolts or any screws, it's darn near impossible to have a car with 1 mile on it still be a number 1. But I would say that just because a car with 5 miles or 50 miles or 15,000 miles that's been immaculately kept, very well kept, even though that car is a number 3, it doesn't mean it can't get a number 2 or number 1 price. And that's where having expert appraisers and people who know cars come into play.
Your third bullet point here on this screen is most cars at shows are number 3s, and all cars used on roads are no better than a number 3. Kind of a strong statement there, but basically, if you drive your car with any regularity, even if you store it 9 months a year, if you're driving it regularly in the summertime, you're probably looking at no better than the number 3. I mean, that might seem like a harsh thing to say, but that's kind of the reality.
Yep, you have to remember that as much as we all love driving our cars, that what a tough environment that is to put something through, what to put paint through, stone chips, dirt, dust, rocks, all the elements out there, acid rain, all those things that are out there in the environment quickly disintegrate a car. And even though to the eye it might be hard to find, it's still doing something to the car. So a number one is a car that has not been driven on roads. It may have been road tested on grass very short periods to make sure everything's working, but even at that point, a good restorer is going to go in and make sure that those parts, after they've tested it, have been returned to absolutely fine condition.
John, you got any misunderstanding commentary you want to give us here? I know that you have to butt heads with car owners, like you said, that may not be happy to hear what you have to tell them. What kind of advice can you give them when it comes to one versus three and other misunderstandings here?
A statement that I often make is either it's perfect or you drive it. And that basically backs up what Angela was just saying. You don't get both. The description of the number one, which I often read and I often chuckle when I'm reading it, is the car has ceased to be an automobile and has become an object of art. And most people, when I'm doing appraisal, I read through that, we all kind of smile and chuckle, and of course everybody's shaking their head, well, my car is not a number one. So that description imprint has been very, very helpful for me as an appraiser.
One of my favorite quotes, and I'll paraphrase it here, is what in a story about Jay Leno's one of his Duesenbergs. He just picked it up from his restorer shop, and something to the effect of, when I picked it up from Randy's shop, my Duesenberg was a number one. By the time I got home, it was a number three. So that's one of the best quotes I've heard, even though it's paraphrased, on what happens to a car when you've been driving it, and it's absolutely true.
We got a good comment kind of question here from Carmelo, who says, as a person who buys and sells classic cars, I find the issue of convincing people that their car is not a number one or a two to be the most challenging. Everybody thinks they have a number one. You got any advice for this, Sal?
That's a tough one, and I agree. It's tough, but if you go through the numbering system, it pretty much spells it out. And if you've been listening to our conversations here this evening, it's spelled out pretty well in that Old Cars Price Guide numbering system. And I feel if you read that to people, it's in print, and you can show it to them. And sometimes they'll ask for a copy, or I'll volunteer to give them a copy of that page out of the Old Cars Price Guide, and that pretty much says it all.
And Ron, here we got another question here. I'll throw this out to both of you guys. From a Michael Schmidt, is the fundamental difference between a 4 and a 5 basically if it is drivable? Well, if the car drives, does that make it a difference between a 4 and a 5?
Well, that's part of it. There's a little bit more to it than that. Again, what we're talking about, when we get to a number 4, I'll use the reverse of what we did with the number 3. From 20 feet away, the vehicle will still appear to need work. When you get to number 5 status, you're going to be able to tell right away it has major flaws. It's probably a fine line from the wear and tear standpoint, but when you get down to number 5, you're talking about some serious flaws in the car that you're not going to have in a number 4.
I would say with the number 5, too, that for somebody to restore a number 5 even, it has to be a pretty special car, either to them or in the hobby. I'll use the 57 Chevy metaphor again because it's a car that we're all familiar with. But everybody knows 57 Chevys, convertibles, and Tudor hardtops and Nomads are very sought after cars, of course. So it's worth bringing back a number 5 57 Chevy Nomad, especially since the parts are out there. But if you're looking at a number 5 and it happens to be let's say a 64 Cadillac, well, unless it's an Eldorado, it's not worth a whole heck of a lot of money. By the time you get done bringing back a number 5 64 Cadillac, you're going to have way more into it than it's worth. But if that car's special to you, or you don't care about what you're going to sink into it, then that's number 5.
We're getting a lot of good questions here, guys. I don't mean to get us bogged down here, but we'll try to pick off a few of these as we go here. From Sean Gilliman. I hope Sean again, I'm not stealing your name here. If you're looking at two identical cars, both completely restored, one has had extensive rust repair versus completely original sheet metal, would you give less value to the repaired car, assuming there are no outward signs or of repairs whatsoever, and the repairs are done to a very high standard? So you got two cars that look pretty much identical. One's been repaired to get to that point. One's got original sheet metal. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, I would say that even to be a number 1 or a 2 in a car that's had serious rust repair, I shouldn't be able to tell. I should call on that car, and I shouldn't be able to tell that it had significant rust in the beginning. But I tell you, as somebody who buys cars, that I like to know that, and having said it earlier, I like to know the car's history. If it was solid before the restoration, I would be willing to pay more, and I have paid more for cars that were nice rust-free cars to start with. And John, would you like to add to that?
I agree with that. Again, it all goes back to the rust and rust repair and the workmanship. I feel that, personally, I feel that a no rust ever car with all original sheet metal, with a full restoration, and they're able to prove that it hasn't had any panels put on it, to me that would be worth more money, and I would pay more for that car also versus one that's had a whole bunch of panels or even just several panels or some panels. Some panels means there was either damage or significant rust. And there are other areas that you can't get at on the car that may be continuing to rust. So a no rust ever or rust-free, totally rust-free car from a warmer climate to me is always going to be worth more money.
Sure. Would you denote that then on the appraisal that at some point?
I do. Okay. I will write down the cars from Oklahoma or Arizona or wherever it came from, and it's only been in the Midwest for X number of months or years or whatever, and been stored in a temperature-controlled, climate-controlled facility. I think that's very important.
Yeah, one other question here, guys, from Elizabeth Dudley, who's asking about number 2 cars. Do you ever rate cars in number 2 that are occasionally driven? Let's go back. Maybe, is there any sort of maybe guidelines as how often a number 1 car can be driven before it becomes a number 2, or how often a 2 could be driven, you guys, before it winds up being a 3? Is a number 2 car one that just gets started but doesn't ever drive? Is there any more specifics we can give on the 2s that might make sense here?
Well, when it comes to number 2s, maybe Ron can expand on this, but when it comes to number 2s, we say it may also be driven 800 miles to 1,000 miles each year to shows on tours or simply for pleasure. But I would add to that a caveat that those 800 to 1,000 miles better have been put on very nice days. The car should have been thoroughly cleaned, top, bottom, underneath, in the cracks and crevices before it was put away, because it's incredible how much wear, dust, what rain will do once that dust gets wet, what it does to those little cracks and crevices, and you start to get that haze around parts that really separates this really sharp, crisp-looking number 2 from a number 3.
And I think that's, we have to be careful about the mileage, equating a condition rating with, a certain number of miles. And Angelo touched on the loving maintenance aspect, where if you are going to drive a car that is a number 2 or a number 1, I mean, you wouldn't want to drive a number 1, but if you have to sit down with that car when you're done and go through and make sure every aspect is clean, detailed, returning it back to the way it was before it hit the road. And again, we just want to be real careful about saying, if you drive a car 1,000 miles a year, it's still a number 2. We all know the way certain people drive, you could run a car into the ground in 1,000 miles. So it just, the best way to look at it is if you're going to have a number 2 car and you're asking how many miles can I drive it and still keep it at a number 2, the important thing to remember is however many miles you're going to drive it, make sure that it's lovingly maintained and detailed once you're done driving it.
Okay, we got one more question here and then we'll try to move on. This is from Heather. If you inspect a vehicle, John, we should throw this one to you. If you inspect a vehicle that could be considered a number 3, and it's an extremely rare vehicle, could you appraise that vehicle with a number 2 rating or even a number 1 price? she uses an example here of a 1947 white truck. I'm going to guess here the condition is condition. You're not going to jack up the condition on it because it's rare, but do you run into that?
We have occasionally. It's usually not a real comfortable area for the appraiser. There's a statement that's often made in the appraisal groups, and it's because it's rare doesn't make it real desirable. That's not a similar saying. It's just I don't know how else to explain it other than rare is not necessarily make it very desirable. And I often tell my customers that the collector car hobby is kind of aimed at the high-end models with a lot of equipment and flashy colors and fancy body styles that suit hardtops and convertibles, and Angelo's did the Nomads and other cars. There's a lot of variables in the old car hobby, but condition is really pretty much what it's all at, and that's why I think it's very important to talk about these 6 conditions that are listed.
Yeah, I would just like to add what John brought up, a very important point about rarity, and a lot of people equate rarity with importance or inflated values, and along with the rust issues where it's being the tip of the iceberg, what we preach around here is popularity or rarity is not a very good indicator of value, because what you're looking at is if a car is rare, that means it probably wasn't very popular when it was new. And so what John was alluding to about the Corvettes and the Mustangs being built in the millions, and those are some of the most prime popular cars out there. So again, the rarity thing based on condition ratings, things like that, you want to be real careful there.
All right, we'll move along to our next screen here, and John will probably throw this one to you too here. Who uses the rating system and how do they use it? You've mentioned several times here that you stick pretty close to it. Tell us how you use it and what kind of people in your profession use it.
Well, I think I can't speak obviously for the other appraisers out there, but I feel that most appraisers at least are very aware of and try to stick with the numbering system. This has been a proven system over the years. Like Ron said earlier, the system has been tweaked, and I think the addition of the number 6 was very important. But I think owners and appraisers alike, and of course the insurance companies, get all the same paperwork that us appraisers do. I mean, this is not secret information. If you have a specialty car, and of course that's a loose term in itself, you should really research at least your vehicle and find as much information as you can about it. And the addition of the internet in recent years has been wonderful. All the information that's out there you can draw from people from all over the world and their experiences.
Ron, you get a lot of calls from all kinds of different people here. You get calls from insurance agents and banks and all kinds of folks, lawyers, people who are settling estates, a lot of different kinds of occupations rely on this. People who are in legal matters, divorces. You hate to talk about that, but there's all kinds of people who wind up giving you calls about this.
Yeah, I get calls probably on a daily basis. And again, there's the main thing that I hear out there is that misconception where somebody will tell me, how lovingly they've maintained a car and they're absolutely certain it's a number 1. And my first question always is, how many miles does the car have on it, or truck, or motorcycle, whatever the case may be? And a lot of times the people will, explode off numbers that are, high 5, sometimes 6 figures, and they're still under the impression that their car is a number 1, or they want it to be a number 1 or worth a number 1 value. So I think we've gone a long way tonight in clearing up that, the majority of the vehicles out there are number 3s, and what is an actual number 1 car, and the amount of work and money and sweat equity that goes into bringing a car up to number 1 status.
And rating and valuing the rare and expensive and volatile cars. I know this is something you wanted to speak to a little bit here. When we get up into the real rare air, sometimes the rules change a little bit with regard to a scale like this.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you'll notice if you're trying to appraise or look up, Car's Price Guide, a car that is very rare, such as a Hemi Cuda convertible or a Hemi Cuda at all, or a Duesenberg or a Ferrari, you're going to see that we say value not estimable. That's because these cars go up and down with the day of the week. Sometimes the sales of these cars are so far apart that it's really hard to chart where they're at if one hasn't been available for a while. The demand is so high for these cars already that when one finally does become available, that price is going to be, you know, out of proportion, much higher than the last time one sold perhaps. So it's really impossible to put that stuff into a price guide, at least responsibly. So I guess if I were somebody that were looking to try to evaluate the value of a car that has a very low production number that's very desirable, I would go and try to look up past auction reports or auction prices, and not to beat it into the ground, but that's one of the things that we did on purpose at Old Car Report, was get those auction prices up there so that if you are trying to figure out what a Duesenberg is worth or what a Ferrari is worth or a Cobra or a Hemi Cuda, you can go on there and see what those sale prices were for those cars. And another thing I like to caution people on is that if you're looking to buy a very rare car or expensive or volatile car, like a Duesenberg or a Ferrari, those cars have a huge following, and there are a lot of people who are experts on those cars. And this is a car, if you're going to spend that kind of money on, you need to do your research. And the best place that you can start doing research is a club. There are people who have file drawers on individual cars and have charted their history, can tell you everything about it, and give you their opinions of what they're worth. That's what they have their ear to. That might be all they care about in life, is that particular car. And they can tell you its value range. They can probably even tell you that specific car that you're looking at. They can probably tell you its history. They can tell you what it's worth, or at least give you an idea. They can tell you where it's been. They can say, well, that doesn't have the original numbers. What happens a lot of times when people buy these rare cars without doing the research is they get it, and then they find out the history, and they may not like that history. So then they change it. You really don't want to get caught in that trap, because other people know that history who have been looking at it, researching it, and you may end up spending too much money on a car. So look at a service like Old Car Report and see what similar cars have been selling for, and then contact a club. Say, who is your Hemi Cuda guy? Who's the Hemi Cuda guy? Who's the Duesenberg guy? Who's the Ferrari guy for this certain model? Start from there, and your experience will be much, much, much more pleasant with the car. You'll be happy, you'll pay right for the car, and you'll be happy with your purchase in the end.
Ron, now dovetailing off of the expensive and volatile, super rare cars, I know you wanted to kind of speak to, and we have a question on this about wrestle mods. How do wrestle mods fit into this system? I know you kind of wanted to address hot rods, custom cars. I guess we could throw wrestle mods in there. The rules are different. The scale doesn't necessarily apply.
Yeah, as far as our Old Cars Price Guide, Old Car Report, it's important to remember that we do not deviate from factory original. And a lot of cars in a lot of categories today, kit cars, aftermarket conversions where a hard top was made into a convertible, replica cars, the Barracudas made into Hemi Cudas, things like that. Our price guide really doesn't reflect those values. That's not to say you couldn't get an appraisal done, and I'm sure John can speak to that. It's just I want to make sure that our readers out there understand that our publications and our pricing database reflects only factory original.
And I know kind of a huge elephant of a topic here, but what about appraising accurately rods, the whole wrestle mod, non-original type cars? I mean, do you kind of have a strategy when you have to do that?
Yeah, most of the price guides, if not all of them, are aimed at stock original type cars. And if a car is modified or if it's a clone, and in recent years a lot of the clones, even though they are advertised as a clone, they still bring big money. Although that market seems to certainly be correcting itself in recent years. But in a modified car, it's all about the tastefulness of the modifications, the quality of the parts used, the way things fit, the workmanship, the color is a big thing. There's a lot of things that go into it. I really think that, again, details make the difference. And when I do an appraisal, most of my appraisals are insurance-oriented, but I do also do them for estate settlements, too, a death in the family or divorce or whatever. But my second page is set up to address to the workmanship and all the fine details, and I think that's very important.
We've got a question here, guys. Maybe we could take this one here from Sean. How do you think the advent of televised auction events have impacted the rating system? It seems prices exist only in their own little world and couldn't be duplicated by other sales methods. Do people's to their own, let's see, what am I trying to say here? Do people's opinions of cars get inflated by seeing them on TV, and are the prices that we're going to see on all these big auctions, and we won't name names, but are they reflective of the real world, Ron? I mean, you're grinning, but
if it happens on TV, it's gospel. That's kind of what I think people will take away. It's a two-edged sword. I mean, obviously these television auctions have given a great exposure to the hobby. I mean, we owe a debt of gratitude. There's people out there that wouldn't know a collector car, from a blade of grass if they weren't watching this stuff on television. It brings an awareness. The other side of that is the prices that you see, some of these cars commanding at some of these televised auctions just are not fair market value. I mean, they're so far afield from that. You have to take into account that there's always an open bar. Who the bidders, they get on TV, they want to impress their friends. So a lot of times, the prices that are paid at a televised auction do not reflect reality. But I will say the majority of cars that you see on a televised auction probably are very well restored, or in a term that I'm glad John brought it up before, over restored, and the price brought for that car reflects that.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next screen here, and John, I guess this one will be right in your wheelhouse here. We're going to talk more nuts and bolts on appraisals, how to prepare your car for condition rating appraisals. What do you want to see in a car that's going to get your eyes on it? What kind of advice can you give to people who are going to pay to have come with it?
Well, attention to detail, again, I can't say enough about that. There's lots and lots of little things. For example, the latches and catches for the hood and the trunk and other various parts under the hood and in the car from the factory are usually cadmium plated. And some people, and myself included over the years, have done, I don't know if you refer to it as a backyard restoration or a home restoration, but we might bead blast the parts or buff them up and clear coat them or dull aluminum. But there really is no substitute for cadmium plating, because that's the way it came out of the factory. To do a nice restoration on a car, and then you open, you see all the latches and stuff, or the hinges for the hood are painted a different color or something odd. It's just it's always going to wear funny and look funny. It's never going to be looking as sharp or as crisp as it did when it came out of the factory. So details, again, are a really big thing. I look at the bottoms of the doors and the trunk and the body supports and the floor, and like Angelo said, the suspension parts. The powder coating thing these days is a wonderful deal for suspension and drivetrain components and things, and they make a lot of kits you can do it yourself. But details really is what it's all about.
And one of our bullet points here: prepare all the paperwork. I know you were kind of speaking to that before. Again, paperwork, have it ready, have it in order, and whatever you have it available, I guess.
Yep. I keep a file for every one of my cars, and I keep it in order. Whenever I do something with it, I put it at the back. If I buy a part for it, it lets me know how much I've spent on the car. It lets me know if I have any problems with that part, where to bring it back to, and it reminds me sometimes of what parts I have. But I know when it comes time for an appraisal that the appraiser is going to want to look at that. They want to see that I have the original window sticker, which is in that file. They want to see the oil changes, so I can say, yes, this car has been maintained. Here's proof that it has 18,000 miles on it. it's just a necessity. I know when John does an appraisal that he likes to make sure that you have the title and that the title matches the car. So all of these things should be in your paperwork, and it's also a good idea. What I do is I keep everything in a chronological order because I have oil changes and service records and stuff like that. But John also made an important point that you want to subdivide your paperwork up and have a special folder within that for just body restoration, mechanical restoration, stuff like that. When you present it, so you can say, yes, I've had the engine rebuilt. Here's the documentation. Yes, I had this restore, painted the car, and I spent this much on it. So here's evidence of that. It helps an appraiser get everything in order, lets them know exactly what they're looking at, because they're walking to your car blind. They've probably never seen your car before. And if you present the car and say things about it and you can back it up, that's certainly going to help them do their job. And probably in the end, they're going to be able to validate things that you already know, and do that by putting a value on the car.
Kind of our last slide here, John, we'll kind of throw this one out to you before we maybe answer a few more questions that have come in. Interview with an appraiser. I guess all the bullet points here we could kind of lump under the general idea of what is it that people can, who haven't had an appraisal done. Let's go with that tack here. For somebody who hasn't had an appraisal done, what can they expect? Basically, what's the process like? Are you going to meet them out in their house, in their driveway? How is it arranged? And basically, how long is it going to take? What kind of process is it?
Okay. When I get a phone call from a customer that's looking for an appraisal, I've got a very basic fee that I charge when it comes to me. If I have to travel to it, it's reasonable to expect to pay an appraiser some travel time. Obviously, with today's expensive fuels and other things, I don't think anybody would really, complain about that. If it's within a reasonable distance of me, I often will just absorb it. But the things to me that are important, one of the first things is with agreeing on, the owner and I need to agree on a realistic number as far as the condition. And so we go through that in detail, and I look the car over top to bottom, listen to it run. I don't necessarily drive it. Some of these questions are insurance-oriented, like do the headlights work and do the wipers work? Well, I don't need to go try all of these things, just like I don't need to look at every receipt that the guy has for the car. That's really not what I'm there for. It's nice to have that stuff, and I think it's important long-term and important to the current owner and probably a future owner. But one of the biggest things that I'm particular on is my appraisals. I consider them as a document, and I suspect that a good attorney could argue that any way you wanted to, but I feel it's a document. I treat it as a document, so it has to be as correct as possible to the best of my ability. So checking numbers from an insurance card with the VIN number on it would not really be as good a source as a title. I've often found typos in titles, the numbers of a VIN number on the title versus the real number on the car. So I like to see, even if the car was just purchased and is not in the new owner's name yet, I still like to look at the title or a registration certificate, and I like to verify that against a number somewhere on the car. Now, 54 and a half, most cars use an engine number and as a VIN number. And of course, all those older cars, a lot of them had new engines put in them, or newer engines or different engines. And so that can often be a glitch. But it's really important to me to make sure that the VIN numbers match, and then we get into much greater detail after that.
And how are people generally going to be using the appraisal information that you provide them? What's the main reason that they come to you?
I would say 95% of the appraisals that I do are at the request of a customer's insurance company. An appraisal should be done by a third party, an independent person who has no interest in the insurance company and no interest in the owner or owner's car. It's got to be a third party independent appraisal, and that appraisal is only as good as the appraiser doing it. If that appraiser is not willing to go to court to defend an appraisal, then I would suggest maybe looking around for another appraiser. I think this is very important. As an appraiser, one of the approaches that I take to each and every one of my appraisals is I've got to be able to look right in the eyes of a judge and jury in a worst case scenario if there's a problem with the value of the car. I've got to be able to look right in the eyes of a judge and jury and make the following statement. At the time of the appraisal, the owner and I agreed this is an approximate value. Nothing is chiseled in granite. Nothing is for sure, and the market is up and down. And I've got to be able to make that statement and look them right in the eye and make sure it's fixed. So I've got to be willing to go to court over any appraisal I've ever done.
What about advice for people who may be shopping for an appraiser, so they're going to get their first appraisal done? Is there a place that they can look? Do they just start asking around? What's the best way to find somebody who's good and you can trust?
Well, there are several appraisal groups, and you can find those advertised in Old Cars Weekly and Old Cars Price Guide. You can also find some online. Another source, I know Hemmings Motor News also has advertisements for appraisers and appraisal groups, and these people, most of them really know what they're doing, and it's money well spent. I look at it as an investment in your investment, and it's just good business to have all your T's crossed and I's dotted, and I really feel an appraisal is a good investment in your investment.
Sure. Well, we're going to have time for a couple more questions here, and John, as long as you're talking, I'll throw this one right to you. I think you kind of touched on this earlier, especially speaking to the receipts that people will show you from the restorations and work that they had done in a car. But Elizabeth asks, when you do an appraisal, do you use the cost of the restoration in compiling the value, calculating the value? As an underwriter, should I use this in accepting a value? Do you put any stock in how much it costs to bring the car back at all?
Well, that's a real good question. Often, and unfortunately more often than not, owners will have more money invested in the restoration than what the car has done, than what the car's worth. And it's too bad, but sometimes that's the price we pay for being in the hobby. Not necessarily a bad thing, because there's a lot worse things you could put your money in. I think the old car hobby has fared well, as Ron said earlier, given our current economic situation here in the United States and in the world for that matter. But I have, on some occasions, I haven't in recent years, but when I will come up with an appraised value. In previous years ago, I might put in parenthesis under my appraised value, I might put in owner has X number, or says he or she has X number of dollars invested in the car. That presents a small problem, but usually not an insurmountable problem, is the insurance agent. Some insurance companies will allow you to appraise it at appraised value, and others will go with a stated value. So at that point, you would hope that you have a well-seasoned insurance agent that can help you make the best decision for you and your car.
Thanks, guys. That's kind of all the slides and all the material we had prepared here. We got a lot of questions. We'll try to get to a few more here before we wrap things up. Now let me throw this one out to you here. Short and sweet from Gerard. Oh boy, I'm having some good names here. Gerard Procasino. Gerard, again, I'm sorry if I'm killing your last name. Please define an original car. Thanks. We probably throw that term around a lot, Ron. What's our best explanation or definition of an original car?
Well, original, to find a totally original vintage car is pretty difficult. I mean, anything that's been driven or used for any amount of time, you're going to have to replace the tires, the battery. The big thing in the hobby right now, one of the categories of vehicle that we're seeing really explode on the scene is the survivor class. And I know within that class, there's, I'll use the term different levels. I'm sure that's not totally correct, but certainly a car can still be considered original if it's the way it came from the factory, but minus the safety issues, like I said, tires, batteries, things like that. And there's probably different levels of that, where maybe if an original car got in an accident and you had to replace the fender with a new old stock piece of equipment, and you had to maybe match the paint for that particular panel. I would say in most survivor class environments that would still be considered an original car. It's a good question. I'm not sure there's a black and white answer to explain what is original, but I think if we go in and just basically say if the car is the way it came from the factory, but had updates for the safety items such as tires and batteries, we're still going to consider that car original.
Hans, we got a question here. Maybe you can help us kind of get to the bottom of what this listener is after. From Russ, how do you classify? I think he probably means grade a car that had a lot of non-old stock parts used as replacement. How do you classify a car that had a lot of non-old stock parts used as replacement? Does it matter where the parts come from necessarily?
Not necessarily. Excuse me. A car that has had reproduction parts, which may be the only thing available, as long as those parts are of quality that match with the cars that line up and have good fit and function, then I don't think that is a detriment to the value of the car. If those parts are of low quality and they don't match up well, they don't function well, then I do think it does negatively affect the value of the car.
Another short, sweet question. Another term we probably throw around a lot that maybe needs some definition. What does numbers matching mean? That one probably gets thrown around a little loosely. Numbers matching car basically equates to?
In most cases that you see the phrase numbers matching, it means that the engine is original to that car. It depends on how particular you want to get. Corvette people, when they see matching numbers, a lot of them mean matching engine, transmission, body, alternator, distributor. There are all sorts of different parts that should be original to that car. That car basically means that car started out intact regardless of where it is today, if it's restored or a real nice original. That car has always been very intact. It's never been messed with. Major parts have never been replaced. And depending on the car, that has different values and valued differently by people. So if it's a 55 Cadillac, matching numbers, not a huge deal. I like to see that on certain cars, especially when the serial number is stamped on the engine, as it is on 55 Cadillacs. That number matches the title, which matches the number on the body, which matches the frame. That's just a nice peace of mind to know that if you ever have any title issues or anything like that, that you've got solid points of those numbers matching. However, when it comes to something like a Corvette, or in a lot of cases, most performance cars, people like to see that the original engine is still in that very same car, and possibly the transmission, the rear end, the alternator, and miscellaneous parts. So for your basic standard car, it tends to weigh less heavily than it does for a performance car. A performance car tends to have a lot more value placed on numbers matching.
John, you go looking for matching numbers when we do appraisals every time?
I do. I ask, and I usually, under the engine section of my appraisal, will put matching numbers if the owner can prove it. And again, proof and or documentation is a really big deal. But I agree with Angelo, especially on a Corvette and performance cars, matching numbers is a big deal. On other cars, it's not as big a deal, but it does have some impact on the value, and especially on the long-term investment.
We have another question here from Steve Kramick. He's asked a couple good questions tonight. Steve, again, I hope I'm getting your last name. Do you think it's better to find an appraiser that specializes in a certain line of cars, i.e. Corvettes, versus an appraiser that appraises all types of cars? John, are there guys out there that really specialize in particular niches? Or is it a better way to go?
There is. There are shops that know so much about the Corvettes, for example, or their particular niche, as you said. They're familiar with the markings on the nuts and bolts, and for example, some of the cars as they come down the assembly line have chalk marks on the frame that designate certain options that are to be put on the car as it goes down the assembly line. In some ground-up restorations, over restored or number one cars, they go way to extremes to get their chalk marks back on in the same place and they look just like they were originally, and they'll take all kinds of photos and measurements and everything else. This, again, would would be a non-driven car would be you know, a number 1 or a number 1 plus or over restored. There's a number of terms that would probably fit. But I think that's it's important to know about all these fine details if you're gonna go to that length. And it all boils down to research the heck out of your subject so you know what you're looking for. But I guess if I were looking for a numbers matching, I would want to research the heck out of it and know what the heck I'm looking for. There's a lot of parts on a car that's not just the engine, trans, and rear end, but there's the frame and there's alternators and water pumps and starters and, you know, all kinds of stuff. They have numbers on them that have to coordinate. There's also date codes. So casting numbers and VIN numbers and date codes, they're all part of it.
Terrific, John. Well, that's about all the time I think we're going to have for tonight for tonight's online seminar. I hope everybody enjoyed it. We've managed to cover a lot of ground, and hopefully we've answered most of your questions. Again, we'll try to get to some of the other questions that were left unanswered later on in emails. A reminder that this program will be available soon as a download at oldcarsweekly.com. And also a reminder that you can find a huge database of pricing trends, pricing information, and lots of other technical information, photos, car history at our new Old Car report that you can find at www.oldcarsweekly.com. Our site, which also has a lot of great feature stories, hobby news, a big list of shows and auction events, a lot of resource material at our site, and I hope you can visit us often online. Ron, Angela, John, thanks a lot. Great job. Want to say good night?
Good night, everybody. Thanks for writing in.
It's been fun.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.